Okay, I am starting the broadcast just a moment early here because I'm going to type you something in the chat here if you can hear me. Anybody is on a minute early, or please let me know when you can hear me. I'm going to scroll down here for a second because I've talked before for 5 minutes and nobody knew what I was saying because my mouth was just moving. So obviously I want you guys to hear what I'm saying, especially if you're taking your time. And if you or someone you know or love is actually experiencing a lot of pain or chronic pain, I know this isn't a huge conversation that happens at purpose-driven chiropractic. It's probably on the lower end of the spectrum for people. Most of us, know our office for the kids that we work with, sensory issues, spectrum, speech delays, constipation, dietary, gut, immune, all sorts of things like that. We also see adults. And we also see adults in pain. And here's the conversation that we're often having with patients and that I want to have with you guys, whether you're a patient in our office or you're coming across this webinar thinking, oh, that's interesting. I'd really like to see what she has to say about this. Maybe you're looking for some hope in your life. Here's what we say, and this isn't to sound harsh by any means or that we don't care. We say we care less about how you feel and more about how you heal. That's really what matters, truly, because we know that our bodies are designed to be healthy. They're designed to self-heal. They're designed to self-regulate. And we want to know what's getting in the way of that process, because if you cut your finger, you might put a Band-Aid on that finger, but it's going to heal. We know it's going to heal. We have faith in the body that it's going to heal. And it's the same thing if there's an injury. If we slip and fall, and we hurt our back, or we woke up out of bed and was like, oh gosh, something's going on. Or maybe you're a college athlete and you kind of wore and tore yourself down. And now being an active parent, it's not as comfortable anymore. Well, we care more about how you're healing and why you're not and what might be interfering with that. So this webinar, we are going to take a kind of a 30,000 foot view of health and what's going on and narrow in and talk specifically about pain and what's happening. And really the webinar should have been called Pain It's in the Brain, which is what I put over here. Let me just kind of change my layout here so you guys can see a few of my slides and you know what I'm talking about. It's really wild when you're thinking, oh, okay, lady, you're telling me it's in my head, but it actually is manifested in the brain. And I never really sat back and thought about that until I was a pediatric chiropractor and until I was a neurological based chiropractor to understand where's the brain getting feedback from, what's going on, how does it communicate with the body, not only in pain and sensory and neurological areas of our body, including body systems from lungs to immune system, digestive system, endocrine, and our hormones. How's the brain getting feedback? And how is it telling, and what is it telling our body to do? And sometimes that is, ow, stop moving. Please don't do that. And I went to college with an economy size, like probably got it from Sam's Club because that's what's in the Midwest, bottle of ibuprofen. And I lived on that thing. From high school through college, and I was an athlete. I was in constant pain. I had no idea. I thought it was just like a normal thing. Oh man, son of a gun, just pop a couple more, until a friend said to me, you really shouldn't be taking all of those. That could really harm your body. And I hadn't thought about that because I thought at the time I was helping my body. And oh, have I learned what to do about when my body isn't healing well. And at that time, yeah, I wasn't feeling well. I was also tired and lethargic, and hormones were off. I was grouchy and grumpy. And many of you that might know someone that's in chronic pain, or if you're in chronic pain, you know that story. You're grumpy and you're grouchy. And here's what we know, and here's a big truth bomb for people that come into our office, and they might put the reason for the visit is they're in pain. They're experiencing back pain or neck pain or headaches. And we know, and we all know in our office that that's not really the reason why you came in. You might be able to say, this is a problem, the pain is here, But really, you probably had that pain yesterday, the week before. It probably wasn't a sudden onset unless you were in an automobile accident. Now you really know you're broken. The pain's been there for a while. And what we know is that it's actually what the pain is keeping you from that's going to bring you in here. So it might have been that you aren't the person that you want to be. It might be that you're irritable. It might be that you're not a good mom or a dad, or feel like a good mom or dad, not that you aren't. You might not be having a great conversation with your spouse or your children or your coworkers, or being able to perform well or do things that was once bringing you joy. Whether it's exercise or going out with friends or getting on the golf course, because pain is preventing that from you from doing those things. So it's really what you're lacking in your life, and it's really what it's been taking from you, more so than it is the pain, because we can all tolerate just a little bit of pain, but when we're irritable and we aren't who we want to be, that's really where we're going to start to take action on it. And honestly, when you're taking a look at, your life kind of deteriorating, if you will, and that might sound like a little bit of a harsh term, but sometimes you might just take a look back. So like, here's where you're at. And then you take a look back and you're like, man, I don't know the last time I felt good. I don't know the last time I bounced out of bed at 5 a.m. ready to go for a workout, or ready to get my week plan or my day plan, ready to, journal and do all the things that I know that I need to do to have a great day, week, month, year, life. I don't know the last time I did that, because it is such a slow progression, right? You boil the frog, you don't throw them in a pot of boiling water. You put them in there and start warming it up. And I know that's an old analogy and it might sound a little bit cheesy, but it's definitely what happens in our lives. And I want to be able to bring people hope that actually isn't how it has to be. And you actually don't have to deteriorate just because you're aging. I definitely feel better now that I'm nearly 40 than I did in my 20s when I was going to college. Once again, I packed a huge economy bottle of ibuprofen because I thought that's how you should manage pain, instead of listening to my body to figure out what's going on and why I might not be healing from what was going on. And it's usually coupled with something else. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to take an even bigger and, like I said, 30,000 foot view on what's happening in our lives, so we can really understand it and know how to move forward from it, and just not get in that perpetual cycle of stress. And I got a couple examples for you and a few patient stories that I'm going to share as we go along. But I'm going to keep this webinar as short as I can, because somebody's that's in pain is probably pretty irritable too, because I know what I feel like when I'm in pain. And I just hurt my back last October, actually. I'm going to show you some scans and some different things that we look at in our office to figure out the cause. But man, was I grumpy and I was tired. It takes energy for your body to heal from something like that. So it was a good reminder of how grumpy people can be when they just don't feel good. So we're also going to be talking a little bit about just awareness of how, once again, I talked about it being in the brain, of how that relay system works, what's going on there, and some actions items on how now to do better. Because we can gain as much knowledge as we want, and until we're able to apply that knowledge, it really is just, useless words on a page or useless words in our brain, until we can make sure that we use that to do better. So if you guys have ever watched Brain Games, it's on Netflix. And I don't watch a whole lot of television. I can't actually sit still for very long. You'll probably see that in the webinar, where I'm just kind of antsy, and you're gonna hear about that a little bit as well, on why our brain needs feedback and how it gets it through movement. But this show, Brain Games, was having, you might have seen this episode, but I'd encourage you to see it. I should have put the information on here so you didn't know the episode. But they were looking and showing people how much pain is in the brain, where they had somebody with their hand outside of a curtain where they couldn't see their hand, and then they put a rubber hand pretending like this is their hand. And they actually got people to start to feel that rubber hand as their hand. And they could literally pinch it, poke it, hit it with a hammer, and people were experiencing pain, where they would do the same thing to the hand behind the curtain that was their actual hand, burn it, pinch it, poke it, and they weren't even budging or moving. It's just wild how much the brain is the one that manifests the pain. It just was like, oh my gosh, all these, this abomination of things that I know just came true on a Netflix show that I sat still for 20 minutes to watch. It's just totally crazy. It is mind blowing to me how much your brain is able to do. 300 trillion bits of information reach your brain every second. You're consciously aware of 50 of those. So it's a pretty dynamic thing, obviously, and you're pretty aware of pain definitely when that is happening, and you're pretty aware of your other senses, which we're gonna talk about here in just a moment, of how you live your life. But it really is through your nervous system. Your brain gets feedback from your nervous system and from your senses, which I'm going to show you on this next slide here. But the function of your nervous system is to perceive, so take in the environment, coordinate, right? Everything that needs to go on, all the behavior of all other cells, send the information back out at the rate of 300 trillion bits of information every second. And it's really doing that through a lot of your senses. And some people know, you might be well aware. I get the 5 senses. I understand what's going on. I have a little bit of 6th sense. I'm just kidding. But there's way more than the 5 senses. There is an internal sense of how you feel. So enteric, how do your organs feel? Are you feeling tight in the chest or in the heart or in the gut? That gave me a stomach ache. How are you actually feeling? And the most important one that we're going to talk about today in this webinar is movement, the balance sense, where you're at in time and space. And that's called proprioception. And that is a huge, huge deal when we are talking about chronic pain, when we're talking about quite a bit of anything. And I talk about this with my children and in a lot of my kid webinars with my parents, because a lot of kids will have proprioceptive issues, either coordination issues or movement issues. And we're going to see why that is so important. If we didn't have proprioception and if we didn't have movement and balance in the muscles and the joints in our bodies, we would literally be a heap on the floor. I mean, there is so much that happens in order for our bodies to do not only gross motor movements, jumping, running, moving, but fine motor movements from the tongue, eyes, ears, fingers. There's so much that has to happen in your brain, and so much precision between your brain understanding where those body parts are. It is absolutely wild. And you've got such a huge relay system between every single muscle and organ and tissue and cell inside of your body. But that joint and movement thing is a really big deal. That's why when our kids were little, when they're babies, we were measuring motor milestones through movement. And can their brains keep up, right? We knew the brain was on track if their movements were on track. That's how the brain had developed. It's still important as an adult for us to understand with exact precision, how much weight should I put on this foot, ankle, how much should it bend, how much should it move. We've seen people that are double jointed. We've seen people that can trip over thin air. We've also seen elderly, and it doesn't even have to be elderly, patients or people who have a hard time with balance. We start to lose proprioception and balance. We start in infancy trying to, learn how to walk and put a foot down and what kind of steps to take and how to bend the knee. And in adult or in elderly, we'll start to see them with a more of a shuffle gait, with, having a hard time figuring out where they're at, and they become a fall risk because they've lost their proprioception and balance, because they've lost movement. And that's a huge deal. Once you move, I always say movement is life, quite honestly. You stop moving, you die. Honestly, everything has to move. And that sounds a little bit morbid, but it's so true. If your body stops moving, things slow down. And I am talking everything slows down. And the biggest thing that's going to slow down is your brain, because it's fed through movement. It's fed through those muscles everywhere in your body moving. But most importantly, which we're going to talk about here next, is in the spine. 60% of how your brain is fed are through the spinal muscles. Your brain has to be fed proprioceptive input in order to charge its batteries. And there's often times when there's not enough feedback. We know when that happens because we feel lethargic. You're sitting around doing nothing. You're like, man, I did nothing all day, but I'm so tired. Yes, because you never fed your brain. And of course, dietary things play a big role in this, but movement is huge. And one of the things that we talk about, not only with children, but with adults, is this scientific word, and you don't have to know this word, but dyskinesia, which really means abnormal movement. There's a misalignment and a fixation. And that is really where people start to marry into chiropractic and say, oh, I think there's something misaligned here. And it sounds really simple. It sounds like, oh, just push right there and then I'll just go back and then I'll be fine again, right? The pain will be gone. And it's just really not that simple. I'm going to explain it to you, here as we go out, throughout the program on why that sounds really lovely. It just sounds like such a beautiful Band-Aid. It's often what you're putting on a bullet hole and not getting down to the root cause. Most people will, enter into a chiropractor's office, and most 90% that come to a chiropractor aren't thinking of children in neurological care. They are thinking of neck pain, back pain, and headaches. And that's what they go to a chiropractor for. And they say, okay, if you push here, once again, it'll feel better and I'll feel great and I'm off the table. I'll be back when it hurts again. And I took care of a lot of patients like that for a really long time until I got into kids and neurological based care. And it wasn't really rewarding because people were always back. You're like, man, I wish for those years that I was doing that, I would have thought, why isn't your body healing from this? Why can't it figure it out? Is it permanently damaged, right? That would be a permanent disability. And it's really not the truth, because our bodies are self-healing and self-regulating, and it isn't the truth. We can go anywhere to cover up the pain. We can get a massage, we can stretch, we can go to a physical therapist, we can take ibuprofen. Once again, I keep ragging on ibuprofen because once again, I lived on it, and I'm sure my liver is barely living because of it. But it's really about the brain, and it's how we influence the brain. And that is what you do when we're adjusting a patient. We found out the coolest thing that we found out is when you hook a patient up to electrodes and you deliver a chiropractic adjustment, the only thing that's changing is in the brain, in the prefrontal cortex, which is the way your brain communicates with the rest of the body. It's just absolutely mind-blowing. It has nothing necessarily to do with that segment, but it helps it heal better. So let's take a look a little closer about dyskinesia, but I want to talk later about healing and the brain and that adjustment and how important these things are, and getting down to the bottom of why you might be feeling grumpy and irritable and seriously just stiff and old and in pain. And you might be really young. You might be like me. You might be 25 listening to this thinking like, oh man, yeah, I don't want to live the rest of my life like this. Or you might be in your prime right now, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, thinking like, I want to keep living this out and I can't do what I want to do. I can't do what I love. I feel like I should have turned my lights on here. Hang on a second. Those are behind me. So dyskinesia, that movement sense, we want to measure. We want to know, yes, movement tends to be the motor side of your nervous system, of course, that sense of where you're at in time and space, the balance. We want to take a look at it and see, because I said those spinal muscles are so stinking important. 60% of what are feeding your brain are in those spinal muscles. We want to know what's going on exactly to each, to the precision of how's your brain getting feedback from different areas, different levels in your spine. We're going to look at some of those and why that's really important. So I have a picture here of a scan to give you guys just a better picture of what's going on inside of the body and why and how we measure things. But this is looking at electrical impulses. So this is an EMG. Close, people think of EKG of the brain, EKG of the heart, EEG of the brain, EMG, muscles around the spinal cord feeding the brain. And when you're looking at extra neurological activity, extra neurological impulses reaching the brain, you're going to start to see some color on this graph. And in this ideal graph would be white. Of course, you can tell that something with color probably isn't great. But I want you to take a couple notes about this color over here that is yellow, and that's a fatigue point. And some people don't really realize maybe when they're in pain, their body has given up a little bit and it's not healing well, because it's not getting feedback there very well, and it's at a fatigue point. A tight muscle is actually a weak muscle. It's a fatigued muscle. It is tight because it doesn't have the flexibility to move, because it is so weak, because it can't hang on. And that nerve, that vital nerve from your spinal cord, is asking to be tight and protected. It is saying, hold on for dear life, stop moving. You aren't strong enough and flexible enough to keep bending and moving, because really your muscles are just there and your joints are just there, not only to hold you up against gravity, but to really protect those vital nerves. And there is so much happening, as we talked about before. And really, your spine is designed to bend and flex. So we've all seen people that are kind of like hunched over and their spine just doesn't move. Well, number one, we know they're not getting feedback to the brain. So number two, we know they have very little proprioception. They're fall wrist, they're balanced wrist. There's a lot happening there. We also know that there's going to be some fixation there. And I'm doing an exaggerated, stuck point there, but we know there's fixation and abnormal movement to the brain. We know that there's dyskinesia, and we know that the spinal cord then isn't moving appropriately. Your spinal cord itself is like a rubber band. It's nice and bendable and flexible and movable, and it should be able to sponge and move through space and bend and twist with your spine. Well, when there is areas that are fatigued, there's areas of high stress, which you're seeing in some of these colored areas. There's a ton of neurological activity going on there. And you're seeing low activity through this zone here, which is actually your adrenal zone and your stress zone. I'm going to show you a chart here in a little bit, but we know it's not getting the movement that it needs. That spinal cord needs to feed your brain. It has got a bunch of cerebral spinal fluid flowing around, nourishing your brain, coming up and down. And it needs to bend and move and twist. And when it's not doing that, it's not feeding your brain well. That's why you'll hear the yogis say, you're as young as your spine is flexible. And now I believe them. I didn't in college when I started. I was like, okay, crazy people. No, it's really true. So bar graph, here's a line graph of the same picture. And this kind of gives us a better idea of what's going on in the fatigue points here, because we want his black line that's outside the means here. It's even outside of the severe. We want it within this gray zone. And you can see, white would be really ideal. You can see how much fatigue he actually has going on through his core, where there's some prime organs and glands and some prime digestion going on through here. We're going to look at why that's important in a little bit. But I want you to take a special notice over here to the symmetry graph, where once again, this is the same scan. And he has a really large abnormal symmetry in this upper cervical spine, and that's upper cervical spine is the most important area. So now over half of those signals that we were talking about that feed the brain are in that upper cervical spine. Most people, you guys, that come to my office that have neck pain, back pain, headaches, bowel dysregulation, they've got immune challenges, you have a respiratory challenge, they've got allergies. We see it in the upper cervical spine because the brainstem sits up there, and it is such a vital organ. We know, our Superman broke that first and second vertebra near the brainstem, which completely oh my gosh, I don't know the word I'm saying. He basically couldn't function from here down, right? He couldn't even breathe. He couldn't swallow. He couldn't talk. Respirations. Obviously, he was on, for as long as he lived, he was on devices to be able to keep him alive. And that was near that vital brainstem where he lost all function beneath. So we know when there's dyskinesia, movement, abnormal movement, and misalignment in that upper cervical spine, we know that there's trouble below. And once again, I said, people typically that are grumpy are coming in saying that they're in pain, but it's really probably because they're just not feeling great about themselves. And quite honestly, not feeling good is more of an internal problem, a self problem, than it is some sort of external problem that's going on. So unhappiness, the greatest cause of unhappiness is self-unhappiness. So there's definitely something that this pain is keeping you or someone else from doing and loving their life. So I know that that's that other saying that says the people that need the most love are the hardest to love. Those are these people, and they'll start to look for ways to numb the pain. And instead of becoming the person they want to, because they're getting down to the cause, they're just covering it up. They're just covering it up with alcohol, with drug addiction, with maybe other forms of addiction that we don't agree with, or even anger. which we're going to talk about here in a little bit, in this fight or flight response, or outlash, or just being impulsive and reactive, which is really your fight or flight response. So we've got to take a look a little bit closer about pain and healing and what might be interfering, like we talked about, from your body's ability to heal, to self-regulate, to do the things that you want it to do. And it's typically stress. Big shocker, right? You're like, yeah, I got a lot of stress. I've got so much going on inside of my brain. I've got so much happening at home. I got so much happening at work and in my life. I can't keep up. Well, that's a chronic fight or flight response. And that will definitely keep you in pain. That will definitely keep your body dysregulated. When we experience stress, we talk about flipping our lid. We talk about that prefrontal cortex that I said was influenced from the chiropractic adjustment. That leaves the scene and our hindbrain takes over. This nice, controlled, logical brain that does a lot of creative thought and can have great conversation flips. And our innate fight or flight response takes over. This is an impulsive and reactive brain. This is your amygdala. This is what's going to dump a bunch of chemicals. And people talk about like cortisol and adrenaline, all those chemicals that the body gets just laden with high blood pressure and heart disease. That's because we're stuck in fight or flight. That's because we flipped our lid one too many times that day, that week, that month, that life. And our body is having a hard time regulating and healing from the pain, because the reverse of that fight or flight response is healing, resting, digesting, and for kids, growth. That's the lid on. That's why we're sleeping. That's why kids do require more rest than we do. Infants require a ton, but we do need enough sleep to heal and repair from the stress we've experienced that day, that week, that month. When I told you I had that back injury about a year ago, I was tired and I needed more rest, even though I wanted to get up and go. And you might be thinking like, oh my gosh, lady, don't tell me to sleep more. I got a lot of stuff to do. Well, you might have a lot of stuff to do, but that lot of stuff to do is going to end sooner than you want it to if you aren't taking care of your body, because your life's going to end sooner than you want it to if you aren't taking care of your body. And then that busyness just doesn't even matter anymore. And I know that sounds harsh as well. That's really the reality of where we get in our lives is a certain amount of time, and let's live it well. Let's live it abundantly. Let's live it full on out and do the things that we want to do with responsibility, obviously. But taking care of our body is the number one thing. Is when we're in stress, fight or flight mode, there's 1,400 chemicals dumped throughout your body to change the physiology of every cell. Heart rate goes up, blood pressure goes up, the blood gets shunted from those vital or internal organs out to the limbs to fight or flee. And that's just fine to be short-lived, but not to live there. Not to stay there, not to develop that way, not to constantly be impulsive and reactive and never have a lid on, and our prefrontal cortex being influenced and parasympathetic to be able to take over and heal our body like it's designed to do. And when you're in parasympathetic, when your body's really tired, because it doesn't want to eat. Think of when you're sick. That's your parasympathetic response. You might not want to eat. You might not feel great about what's going on. I'm going to try to get my face back here. I think I just double clicked actually. There we am. Hang tight. I'll just see again. Hang on. Change the layout. Back to here. I wanted to see, I guess it really doesn't matter if you guys can't see my face while I'm explaining this next slide, because it's pretty important to look at the balance of fight or flight, because you cannot be both in growth mode. You can't be in resting, healing, and digesting and fight or flight at the same time. It doesn't work. We all know when we've had night sleeps, when our brain is on and it just absolutely doesn't shut off. Wow, I just can't even, doing some double clicking here to see if I can't just get my face off up here. And it's that fight or flight and parasympathetic response is very inversely proportional. So that was the other part of that slide where you saw that little balance piece of it, where there's a sliding scale of balanced fight or flight, parasympathetics off. Flip it around. When we have a night's rest of our brain feeling stressed or restless and we move and we can't think and we wake up just tired and lethargic, we haven't healed from the stress of the day. We haven't taken care of our body. And we all know what that's going to absolutely lead to. And instead, when you are tired, now we're hitting the sugar. Now we're hitting the caffeine to try to stimulate our brain and our body to stay alive and awake to finish doing what we're doing. We're going to continue to kick out the cortisol. We're going to store fat. We're going to kick up adrenaline. We're going to drain our adrenals. It's going to back up into our thyroid and then into our pituitary gland. And a lot of people will come in when they have thyroid issues. Well, we got to reverse time because we know that you're going to have adrenal issues. We know your adrenals are fatigued before it's getting to that thyroid task for the thyroid for help. And thyroid's been a really big deal in women and men actually in our 30s and 40s, and even some tying into Hashimoto's with an autoimmune condition. And that's a complete flop on the immune system and that parasympathetic response. We know fight or flight has been taking over, and we haven't got enough parasympathetic immune system response when we start having an autonomic nervous system and an autonomic and an autoimmune condition, because it is attacking your own tissue. All right, give me 2 seconds here to see if I can see what's going on and give us a double click and get back to my slides. And if I can't, well, then we're just gonna, you just get to keep seeing me instead of the slides. All right, hang tight, friends. I don't know why it absolutely doesn't want to click over to my next thing. So, oh well. If it wants to catch up here in a moment, it just might, or it might not. Okay, so I know you couldn't see that slide that I had pulled up there. Maybe you just caught it for just a moment, and you can, if you're watching this in a recording, you can rewind and look back at it to see how inversely proportional that fight or flight response is, and just how different the organs and glands that are under stress, what your body's doing when it's turning down digestion, it's turning down, your body from being able to release digestive enzymes. It's turning down your immune system. Things that don't matter when your body's under stress, when it's trying to survive, are going to get turned down. And in your parasympathetic response, in the reverse, you're going to see just the opposite. You're going to see digestive enzymes turn up. You're going to see peristalsis in the stomach turn up. You're going to see all of those things, the immune system turning up and doing what it needs to do, and also creating a balance, which is a really big deal. Part of that parasympathetic nervous system, and one of the biggest influencers of it is in your upper cervical spine. It's called your vagus nerve. It really runs a big portion of that parasympathetic response. It is usually experiencing a really low tone or low feedback to the brain in somebody that's been stuck in fight or flight. Some people have that inhibited and have it's something working just completely against them, kind of like that scan I showed you before with that really large imbalance in that upper cervical spine that he was experiencing. He wasn't getting good feedback to the brain, which tells me everything below wasn't. His brainstem wasn't. He wasn't getting a good motor sense. He was uncoordinated. That shutdown area was part of the gut that has been strained over so long. Stress and filtration is not working well. He's not able to eliminate toxins in his life. And when you're looking at things that feed the fight or flight response, stress is going to come in 3 forms: physical, chemical, and emotional. And a lot of what we're talking about right now is the physical. And really, the physical in that movement sense that we're talking about feeding your brain, not moving your body, is a physical stress. That is a trauma to our body, because we are designed to move. When we have office jobs and we're sitting at a desk like I am, we are not feeding our brain. Remember, 60% of those spinal nerves are what feed the brain. That's why you'll start to get antsy at your desk. You'll start moving your fingers, your feet, your jaw. You might chew on things because your brain's looking for feedback. And if it can't get it through the movement, it's going to try in other ways. And one of the ways it's going to try is through kicking out adrenaline, through asking you to eat really quick, simple sugars. People that are under stress are usually the ones that are craving junk food, because your brain doesn't have time. Remember, under fight or flight, it doesn't have time to break down high dense nutrients and eat, nice, beautiful, luscious spinach salad. It is like, give me something quick. I need a Twix. It's just something fast. Feed the brain. Let me get on with my life. And then once my sugar starts to crash, I'm going to need it again. And you can see mood swings start to go without you. And then, of course, we know down the road that when our cells aren't fed well, and we know when our body starts getting exhausted from releasing insulin, is when we start to get pre-diabetic as well. So there's just some pretty big issues that can come with just calming yourself down and choosing your stress wisely, is what I always say. Physical stress, chemical stress, and emotional stress. And when we perpetuate that cycle of stress, we start living there. One of the other big components when you're looking at that emotional component to stress, which is seriously a really big deal. I've had patients come in just kind of like limping, low back, like, oh man, my back's so flared up, dog. It's just unbelievable. What'd you do? Nothing. You did. You know what you did? Because you told me 2 weeks ago that you had an abnormal mammogram and you're really worried about breast cancer, and they're going to go in and do a biopsy. And this is an emotional component to your stress. It is going to manifest in the weakest point. Yes, this patient had had chronic low back pain in the past, but anytime she was emotionally stressed, we would see it manifest there. And once she could start to recognize, now, of course, she couldn't help the stress that was there at the moment, but once she was able to recognize that that physical pain was manifesting, that emotional pain was manifesting physically in her back, it was her body not healing well because she was stressed, because she wasn't sleeping through the night, because she was worried about all the things that might come about if that cancer scan came back positive. And I've seen this time and time again with other patients where they might have, oh my gosh, I have this, whatever it is, shoulder pain, knee pain, back pain, head pain. And we look back and we start peeling apart those layers of stress to look at what is perpetuating this cycle, what is keeping you in fight or flight, what's keeping you from healing. And we can usually just kind of put our finger down on a few things. And here's what happens. Yes, these few things could be really big things. This could be a trauma, an emotional trauma that was relived in childhood, that is just there over and over and over again, living in your brain, because your brain doesn't know whether it's in the situation at that moment or you're thinking about that situation. It is acting exactly the same. It is going to dump the same chemicals. It's going to have the same physiological response, because it is there to protect you. It literally will not know if you are perpetuating that stress response, and your nervous system actually remembers everything. Remember, I told you 300 trillion bits of information are reaching your brain. You're consciously aware of 50 of those. Our subconscious picks up everything, and it also holds on to everything. And your spinal cord is that database. Your brain is the computer. Your spinal cord, your nervous system, houses everything. And it might just be living in stress subconsciously, and you literally don't know that it's hung on to all of that stress and it hasn't been able to let it go. So often when people are coming in under chiropractic care and we take a look through their history and we see the stress that they've been through, we will let them know, once we start adjusting you, you will probably experience a little bit of a detox, because stress can't disappear. It has to dissipate through your body. You might relive a couple like old shoulder injuries. You might be teary-eyed. You might be a little bit weepy, and people are like, yeah, okay, until they really experience it. And it's really becomes more of the hard, easy route to life, to get rid of the old pain, to get rid of all the old stress, to get rid of all the old junk that's been housed up in your nervous system, to get a tight lid. Remember, I told you every adjustment influences that lid, to put that prefrontal cortex on tighter, to let your brain make really good judgment calls on what to heal, on what to do, on how to talk, on how to act, and how to think, when that prefrontal cortex is on there tight and you aren't living with a loose lid or a lid completely off, when you start to get that part of your body under control is really when the easy keeps going. And I'm not saying, oh, now your life's going to be butterflies, right? You're going to be running through fields of grass. No, you still have to manage your stress appropriately. You still have to make really wise decisions to keep moving your life forward. You still have to do the things that are going to feed your body well. Put yourself in emotional situations that are going to feed your body well, not run from stress, which a lot of people will do, is run away from it and not ever be challenged by it. That's how you actually will grow. But you can't experience trauma over and over again and expect your body and your nervous system not to remember it and not to stay in growth and stay in protection instead of growth mode. So I wish I could have got to my next few slides to show you guys a couple pictures, because I had a picture of where that vagus nerve was where you guys could see it. I'm showing some of your organs and glands. I had a couple other more sciencey terms about dysautonomia, which is when there is irregulation inside of your autonomic nervous system, what that looks like, and how our scans measure just how far into fight or flight you are and just about how much of a healing capacity you have to experience stress, because really it's about adaptability. It's not that you won't experience stress in your life, it's how well you adapt to it and how well you just manage the new stress that comes your way, instead of having to now experience new stress on top of the snowball effect of all this old stress that your body's been hanging on to and not been able to let go of. And we will keep you from healing. It will keep your brain and your body from moving the way you want it to. It's going to lessen the brain's ability to get feedback, just like we talked about with that dyskinesia. It's a pretty big deal when your brain can't be fed well. So outside of your brain being the number one energy source and nutrients suck for your whole body, you're going to have your digestive system, your immune system, and your endocrine system. And there's some people that will struggle with all three of those, endocrine being your hormones, because they've been experiencing stress. And it might be because you're not getting your brain feedback, but it might be because you can't necessarily help it. There's a pretty large imbalance in there. You need a lid put on tighter. You need that motor system moving appropriately. You don't want to keep putting Band-Aids on bullet holes, because you know that you have a lot of life to live and you want to live those years really, really well. Come see us. Make an appointment, say you watch this video, get a VIP pass at Purpose Driven Chiropractic. Patients that come in off the streets that are a non-complicated case, it's $189 to get our scans and a consultation with a doctor and get you a plan moving forward and a game plan to get you a healthier life. It's $300 for a very complicated case. When you watch these videos, it's $100. So I know that you're educated, I know that you're committed, and I know that you want a healthier life. And chiropractic is about getting you a higher life expression. It's about you having now extra energy and abundance to be able to give back to others and give back to the world. And we know that that's important during this time. Thank you guys for watching. I hope that was helpful. Sorry about the slides, but I hope you got the message, and I hope you have some hope for your life to be much more high quality. I'll talk to you guys soon.